The dust swirled around the man's boots as he walked down the main street of Millbrook, Texas. It was a hot day in July 1887, and the sun beat down on the small town like a hammer on an anvil. But it was not the heat that made people stop and stare. It was the man himself. Samuel Morrison stood nearly 8 feet tall. His shadow stretched across the wooden walkway like a giant tree. When he passed by the general store, Mrs. Henderson dropped her basket of apples. The fruit rolled across the dirt road as she stood with her mouth open, watching the enormous man walk by. Sam kept his eyes straight ahead. He had learned long ago not to look at the faces of people when they first saw him. Their expressions were always the same: fear, shock, and sometimes disgust. Children would run behind their mothers' skirts. Men would step back and reach for their guns. Women would gasp and cover their mouths. He had been walking for 3 days to reach Millbrook. His last job had ended badly, like most of his jobs did. The mine foreman had hired him for his strength, but the other workers were afraid to go down into the dark tunnels with him. They said he was bad luck. They said giants brought trouble. So Sam had packed his few belongings and left town in the middle of the night. Now he was looking for work again. He had heard that the Peterson ranch needed help. The owner, Jake Peterson, was known to be a fair man who cared more about hard work than what a person looked like. Sam hoped this was true. As he walked through town, a small group of children started following him. They stayed far behind, whispering and pointing. Sam could hear their voices. "He's as tall as the church." "Steeple," one boy said. "My pa says, giants eat children," a little girl whispered. "He could step on us like bugs," another child added. Sam's heart grew heavy. He had never hurt a child in his life. He had never hurt anyone, really. But people saw his size and decided he must be dangerous. They did not see the gentle soul inside the giant body. The Peterson Ranch was 2 miles outside of town. Sam could see it in the distance with its white farmhouse and red barn. Cattle grazed in the green fields and horses ran free in the corral. It looked peaceful and welcoming. But as Sam got closer, he saw ranch hands working near the fence. They stopped what they were doing when they spotted him coming down the road. One man dropped his hammer. Another took off his hat and scratched his head. They all stood frozen, watching the giant approach. Sam walked up to the fence and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said in his deep, rumbling voice. "I'm looking for Mr. Peterson. I heard he might have work." The ranch hands looked at each other. Finally, an older man with gray hair stepped forward. "I'm Jake Peterson," he said. "You must be the man who sent word ahead. Samuel Morrison, right?" "Yes, sir," Sam replied. He was surprised that Mr. Peterson seemed calm. Most people either ran away or became very nervous when they first met him. Jake Peterson was a short, sturdy man with kind eyes. He looked up at Sam without fear. "I got your letter last week. You said you were looking for ranch work and that you were unusually tall. I guess that was putting it mildly." "Yes, sir. I know my size can be unsurprising, but I'm a hard worker. I'm strong and I know how to handle cattle and horses. I can fix fences, build barns, dig wells. Whatever you need." Jake nodded slowly. He walked around Sam, looking him up and down like he was buying a horse. "How tall are you exactly?" 7 feet and 11 inches, sir. "Almost 8 feet. Can you fit through a normal door?" "If I duck down real low." "Can you ride a horse?" "I can, but I usually break them. I stick to walking or using a wagon." Jake Peterson smiled. "Well, that's honest of you. I like honesty." He looked at his other workers who were still staring. "Boys, get back to work. The fence won't fix itself." The ranch hands slowly returned to their tasks, but Sam could feel their eyes on him. He was used to being watched. It had been happening his whole life. "Tell me about your experience," Jake said, leaning against the fence. Sam straightened his shoulders. "I've worked on ranches in Colorado and New Mexico. I've worked in mines in Arizona. I can handle any kind of physical work. I don't get tired easy and I don't complain. I just ask for fair pay and a place to sleep." "What happened at your last job?" Sam hesitated. He could lie and make up a story. But Jake Peterson seemed like a man who would appreciate the truth. "The other workers were afraid of me. They said I brought bad luck. The boss let me go to keep peace among the men." Jake's face grew serious. "Were they right? Do you bring bad luck?" "No, sir. I work hard and keep to myself. I don't cause trouble. I just look different than most folks." Jake Peterson was quiet for a long moment. He watched his cattle grazing in the field. Finally, he spoke. I don't believe in luck, good or bad. I believe in hard work and treating people fair. Can you start tomorrow? Sam felt relief wash over him like cool water. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The pay is $30 a month plus meals and a place to stay. There's a small cabin behind the barn that nobody uses. It might be big enough for you if you don't mind low ceilings. That sounds perfect. Jake Peterson extended his hand. Sam reached down and shook it carefully, trying not to crush the smaller man's fingers. Welcome to the Peterson Ranch, Samuel Morrison. I hope you'll be happy here. For the first time in months, Sam allowed himself to smile. I hope so too, sir. As the sun began to set, Jake showed Sam around the ranch. They walked past the main house where Jake's wife was hanging laundry. She waved politely but kept her distance. They visited the barn where the horses whinnied nervously at Sam's scent. They looked at the cattle in the far pasture, peacefully chewing grass. Finally, they reached the small cabin that would be Sam's new home. It was simple but clean, with one room, a small fireplace, and a bed that looked too short for him. But it had 4 walls and a roof, which was more than Sam had in many places. Mrs. Peterson will have breakfast ready at 6, Jake said. Work starts at 7. We'll see how you do with the cattle tomorrow. After Jake left, Sam sat on the porch of his new cabin and looked out at the ranch. The evening air was cool and sweet. In the distance, he could see the lights of Millbrook beginning to twinkle. For the first time in a long while, Sam felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt hope. 3 miles down the dusty road from the Peterson Ranch stood a 2-story white house with green shutters. A wooden sign by the front gate read, O'Sullivan Boarding House, Clean Rooms, Good Meals. The house was surrounded by a small garden where vegetables grew in neat rows and flowers bloomed in bright colors. Margaret O'Sullivan wiped her hands on her apron as she hung the last sheet on the clothesline behind the house. The morning sun was already hot, and she knew it would be another scorching day. She could hear her 8-year-old daughter Emma playing in the garden, talking to the chickens as if they were her best friends. Mama, Henrietta laid 3 eggs today, Emma called out, holding up a small basket. That's wonderful, dear. Bring them inside and we'll use them for breakfast. Margaret smiled as she watched her daughter skip toward the house. Emma had her father's dark hair and bright blue eyes. Sometimes when Margaret looked at her, the resemblance was so strong it made her heart ache. Patrick O'Sullivan had been gone for 2 years now, killed in a mining accident when a tunnel collapsed. But Emma was growing up so fast that Margaret sometimes forgot how much time had passed. The boarding house had 6 rooms for guests, and Margaret kept them all spotless. She took pride in providing clean beds, hot meals, and a quiet place for travelers to rest. Most of her guests were traveling salesmen, cattle buyers, and occasionally a family moving west to California. She charged fair prices and worked hard to make everyone feel welcome. Margaret had inherited the boarding house from Patrick's aunt, who had run it for 30 years before her death. When Patrick died, everyone expected Margaret to sell the place and move back east to live with her parents. But Margaret had refused. This was her home now, and she was determined to make it work. At 32, Margaret was still a young woman. She had auburn hair that caught the light like copper, green eyes that sparkled when she laughed, and a figure that turned heads when she walked through town. But she always wore her wedding ring and kept Patrick's photograph on the mantel in the parlor. The people of Millbrook respected Margaret for her independence and hard work. But they also worried about her. A woman alone with a child faced many challenges on the frontier. There were bills to pay, repairs to make, and dangers to face. Many folks thought she should remarry for practical reasons, if not for love. Margaret was hanging her apron on a peg by the kitchen door when she heard a knock at the front entrance. She smoothed her hair and walked through the parlor to answer it. Standing on her porch was Thomas Bradley, the town banker. He was a thin man in his 40s with neatly combed brown hair and a well-trimmed beard. He wore a clean white shirt and black vest even in the heat. He held his hat in his hands and smiled nervously. Good morning, Mrs. O'Sullivan. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, Mr. Bradley. Please come in. Would you like some coffee? That would be very kind. Margaret led him to the small sitting area in the parlor and poured coffee from the pot she always kept warm on the stove. Thomas Bradley had been coming to visit once a week for the past 6 months. He was always polite and proper, but Margaret could see the hope in his eyes. How is business at the boarding house? He asked, settling into the flowered chair by the window. Very good, thank you. I have 5 rooms occupied this week. A cattle buyer from Dallas, 2 traveling salesmen, and a young couple heading to California. That's wonderful. You've built quite a reputation for hospitality. Margaret nodded and sipped her coffee. She could tell that Thomas Bradley had something important on his mind. He seemed more nervous than usual. Mrs. O'Sullivan. Margaret, I've been thinking about our conversations over the past few months. Yes? You work so hard to keep this place running. It must be difficult managing everything by yourself. Margaret set down her coffee cup. I manage just fine, Mr. Bradley. Of course, of course. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. You're a remarkable woman. It's just that... He paused and cleared his throat. A woman in your position faces many challenges. Financial responsibilities, property maintenance, raising a child alone. It would be natural to want some partnership. Margaret felt her stomach tighten. She had been expecting this conversation for weeks. Mr. Bradley, I appreciate your concern, but Emma and I are doing well. We don't need any help. But think of Emma's future. A good education, nice clothes, social advantages. As my wife, you would have security and comfort. Emma would have opportunities that a boarding house keeper's daughter might never see. Margaret stood up and walked to the window. She could see Emma in the garden, chasing a butterfly between the tomato plants. Her daughter was happy and healthy. They had a good life together. Mr. Bradley, you're a kind man, and I'm honored by your proposal. But I'm not ready to remarry. I may never be ready. Thomas Bradley set down his coffee cup and joined her at the window. It's been 2 years, Margaret. Patrick wouldn't want you to spend your life alone. You didn't know my husband. Mr. Bradley, please don't tell me what he would want. Her voice was sharper than she intended, but Margaret was tired of people telling her how she should feel and what she should do. I'm sorry. I meant no disrespect. I just think, in time, you might see the advantages of having a husband again. I understand your point of view, but my answer is no. Thomas Bradley nodded sadly and picked up his hat. I won't give up hope. Perhaps someday you'll change your mind. After he left, Margaret sat in the parlor and looked at Patrick's photograph. He was smiling in the picture, wearing his best suit. They had been married for 6 years before the accident. 6 wonderful, challenging, loving years. Margaret had received 3 marriage proposals in the past year. Thomas Bradley was the most persistent, but Dr. Samuel Hayes had also asked for her hand, as had William Morrison, who owned the largest general store in town. All 3 men were good, decent, and financially stable. All 3 could provide security for her and Emma. But Margaret wasn't looking for security. She had loved Patrick with her whole heart, and the thought of marrying someone else felt like betrayal. She wore his ring not as a symbol of mourning, but as a reminder of what real love felt like. That afternoon, Margaret was in the kitchen preparing dinner for her guests when Emma came running inside. Mama, Mrs. Peterson was in town today. She said they hired a new ranch hand who's as tall as a tree. Is that so? She said he's the biggest man she's ever seen. Bigger than the blacksmith. Bigger than anyone. Margaret smiled at her daughter's excitement. Emma loved stories about unusual people and strange events. Well, I'm sure Mrs. Peterson was exaggerating. She said he seems nice, though. Real quiet and polite. That evening, as Margaret tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked, Mama, why don't you want to get married again? Margaret sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed Emma's hair. What makes you ask that? I heard Mr. Bradley talking to you today, and Dr. Hayes asked me last week if I'd like to have a new papa. Margaret felt a flash of anger. Adults had no business discussing such things with her daughter. What did you tell Dr. Hayes? I said I already had a papa, even if he's in heaven now. Margaret's heart filled with love for her wise little girl. That's exactly right. Your papa will always be your papa no matter what. But would it be okay if you got married again? I mean, if you wanted to? Margaret considered the question carefully. Love isn't something you can force, Emma. It either happens or it doesn't. Right now, I'm happy with just you and me. Me too. Mama, we make a good team. Margaret kissed Emma's forehead and blew out the lamp. As she walked back to the kitchen to finish cleaning up, she thought about the conversation. The truth was, she couldn't imagine loving anyone the way she had loved Patrick. He had been her partner, her best friend, her other half. She picked up Patrick's photograph from the mantel and traced his face with her finger. I miss you, she whispered. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to let someone else into our lives. Outside, the summer night was warm and quiet. Margaret could hear crickets chirping and the distant sound of cattle lowing on the Peterson ranch. She had built a good life for herself and Emma in this small town. She had her independence, her business, and her daughter's love. For now, that was enough. The storm hit Millbrook on a Tuesday night in late August. Margaret woke to the sound of wind howling around the boarding house and rain pounding against the windows like angry fists. Lightning lit up the sky every few seconds, followed by thunder that shook the house down to its foundation. Emma crawled into bed with her mother, trembling with each loud crash of thunder. Margaret held her daughter close and listened to the storm rage outside. She had lived through many storms, but this one sounded worse than most. By morning, the wind had died down and the rain had stopped. But when Margaret stepped outside to survey the damage, her heart sank. The storm had torn half the roof off the back porch. Broken boards and twisted metal lay scattered across the yard. The chicken coop was completely destroyed and 3 of her chickens were missing. "Oh no," Emma said, standing beside her mother. "Poor Henrietta." Margaret put her arm around Emma's shoulders. "We'll find the chickens, dear. They probably just found somewhere safe to hide." But the damage to the boarding house was serious. The back porch roof had protected the kitchen door and windows from weather. Without it, the next rain would flood the kitchen and ruin everything inside. Margaret's 5 guests came outside to look at the damage. The cattle buyer from Dallas shook his head sympathetically. "That's going to be expensive to fix," he said. "Do you know any carpenters in town?" asked one of the traveling salesmen. Margaret nodded. "Mr. Henderson does some carpentry work. And there's a new man at the Peterson Ranch who's supposed to be good with his hands." "The giant?" Emma asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "What giant?" the cattle buyer asked. "There's a new ranch hand who's nearly 8 feet tall," Margaret explained. "Mrs. Peterson says he's very skilled at building and repairs." The traveling salesman whistled. 8 feet tall? That's not a man, that's a walking tree." After her guests left for their business in town, Margaret walked to the Peterson Ranch to ask about hiring the new man. She had never seen him herself, but she needed someone strong enough to handle the heavy work quickly. Mrs. Peterson met her at the front door. "Margaret, dear, how did you weather the storm?" "Not very well, I'm afraid. I lost half my back porch roof. I was hoping to hire your new ranch hand to help with repairs." Mrs. Peterson looked uncertain. "Well, Sam is certainly capable, but he's quite unusual to look at. I don't want you to be frightened." "I'm not easily frightened, Mrs. Peterson. I just need someone who can do the work. He's working in the far pasture today, fixing fence posts. Jake can send him over this afternoon if you'd like." That evening, Margaret was sweeping broken glass from the kitchen floor when she heard heavy footsteps on the front porch. The floorboards creaked under someone's weight. She walked to the door and opened it. The man standing on her porch was indeed enormous. He had to bend his head to avoid hitting the porch ceiling. His shoulders were broader than the doorway. But what struck Margaret most was not his size, but his gentle brown eyes and the careful way he removed his hat when he saw her. "Ma'am, I'm Samuel Morrison. Jake Peterson sent me to look at your storm damage." His voice was deep and soft, like distant thunder. Margaret had to look up to meet his eyes, which made her feel like a child. "Please, come in. Well, if you can fit through the door." Sam smiled slightly and ducked down, turning sideways to squeeze through the doorway. Once inside, he had to keep his head bent to avoid hitting the ceiling. "I'm afraid my house wasn't built for someone your size," Margaret said. "Most places aren't, ma'am. I'm used to it." Margaret led him through the house to the back porch where he could stand at his full height under the open sky. Sam examined the damage carefully, running his hands along the broken boards and twisted metal. "This will take about 3 days to fix properly," he said. "I'll need to rebuild the frame, replace all the boards, and put on new metal roofing. Do you want me to match what was here before, or would you like something stronger?" "Something stronger if it doesn't cost too much more." "I can do it for $25, including materials." Margaret was surprised. That was less than she had expected to pay. "That seems very reasonable. I work fast, and Jake Peterson gives me a fair price on lumber from his mill." As they talked about the repairs, Emma came home from playing at a friend's house. She stopped in the yard and stared up at Sam with wide eyes. "Are you the giant?" she asked. "Emma," Margaret scolded. "That's not polite," but Sam chuckled. "It's all right, ma'am. I get that question a lot." He looked down at Emma. "I suppose I am pretty tall. What's your name?" "Emma O'Sullivan." "Are you really 8 feet tall?" "Close to it. 7 feet and 11 inches. Do you hit your head on things a lot?" "Every day," Emma giggled. "That must hurt." "You get used to it. Sam started work the next morning. Margaret was impressed by how quickly and efficiently he worked. His enormous hands could carry 3 boards at once, and he could reach places that would require a ladder for most men. But as the days passed, Margaret noticed that Sam seemed to be watching her interactions with the town's men very carefully. When Thomas Bradley stopped by to check on the storm damage, Sam observed their conversation from the porch roof where he was working. After Bradley left, Sam climbed down from the roof and said, "That banker fellow sure seems interested in more than just your storm damage." Margaret felt her cheeks flush. "Mr. Bradley is a friend." "Uh-huh. And I suppose that doctor who stopped by yesterday is just a friend too?" "Dr. Hayes was checking to make sure Emma and I weren't hurt in the storm." Sam hammered a nail with more force than necessary. "Seems like you have a lot of concerned friends in this town." The next day, William Morrison from the general store brought supplies for the porch repair. He lingered after Sam had unloaded the lumber, clearly wanting to talk to Margaret privately. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, I hope the storm didn't cause too much damage to your business," he said. "Nothing that can't be fixed. Mr. Morrison, thank you for asking. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. A woman in your position, well, you shouldn't have to face these challenges alone." From his perch on the roof, Sam called down, "She's not alone. She's got a giant fixing her roof." William Morrison looked up nervously. "Yes, well, I meant long-term challenges. Financial security, protection, that sort of thing." After Morrison left, Margaret climbed the ladder to where Sam was working. "That was rude, was it? I thought I was just pointing out that you're perfectly capable of handling your own problems." Mr. Morrison was being kind. Sam laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, he was being kind, all right. Kind enough to suggest you need a man to take care of you. How generous of him. Margaret felt her temper rising. "You don't know anything about my situation. I know enough. I see these men circling around you like vultures around a wounded animal. The banker with his talk of financial security, the doctor with his concern for your health, the shopkeeper worried about your protection. They all want the same thing. And what's that? A pretty widow with a profitable business. You're quite a prize, Mrs. O'Sullivan." Margaret's face burned with anger. "How dare you? I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. You've got them all dancing to your tune. The Grieving Widow Act is working very well." Margaret climbed down the ladder so fast she nearly fell. "Get off my property now." Sam looked down at her, surprised by her reaction. "Ma'am, I didn't mean, I said get off my property. Take your tools and leave. I'll find someone else to finish the work." "Mrs. O'Sullivan, wait." But Margaret had already stormed into the house, slamming the door behind her. Sam climbed down from the roof and gathered his tools slowly. He could hear Emma asking her mother what was wrong, and Margaret's voice explaining that Mr. Morrison wouldn't be coming back. As Sam walked away from the boarding house, he felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and regret. He had spoken the truth as he saw it. Margaret O'Sullivan was playing games with these men's hearts, keeping them all hoping while she decided which one could give her the best life. But something about the look in her eyes when she ordered him to leave bothered him. It wasn't the look of a woman who had been caught in a lie. It was the look of someone who had been deeply hurt. That night, as Sam sat in his small cabin, he tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing. Women like Margaret O'Sullivan needed to hear the truth sometimes. They needed to know that not everyone would fall for their performances. But deep in his heart, Sam wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. For 3 days, Margaret tried to find someone else to finish her porch repairs. She asked Mr. Henderson, the town's part-time carpenter, but he was busy building a barn for the Miller family. She inquired about hiring men from the neighboring towns, but they all wanted too much money or couldn't come for several weeks. Meanwhile, the unfinished porch was getting worse. Another small storm had blown through, and without a complete roof, water was starting to damage the kitchen walls. Margaret watched helplessly as brown stains spread across the white paint near her stove. Emma kept asking when the big man would come back to finish the roof. "I liked him, Mama. He was nice to me." "Mr. Morrison was not nice, Emma. He said some very unkind things." "What kind of things?" Margaret didn't know how to explain to an 8-year-old that Sam had accused her of manipulating men's feelings. "He misunderstood some things about our life here." On Saturday morning, Margaret was hanging laundry when she saw Sam walking up the road toward town. He was carrying a toolbox and walking with purpose. When he reached her gate, he stopped and looked at the damaged porch. Margaret continued hanging sheets, pretending she hadn't seen him. But Sam didn't walk on. He opened the gate and came up the path to the house. "Mrs. O'Sullivan," he called out, "I'd like to finish your roof." Margaret turned around, a wet sheet still in her hands. "I told you to leave. I know what you told me. But that roof is going to fall down if someone doesn't fix it soon. The next storm will flood your kitchen. That's not your concern anymore." Sam set down his toolbox and looked at the water stains on the kitchen wall that were visible through the open door. "Look, I know you're angry with me. You have every right to be. But this isn't about me or you anymore. This is about keeping your house from being ruined." Margaret hung the sheet on the line with sharp, angry movements. "I can find someone else." "Who?" "Henderson's booked for weeks. The carpenter in the next town wants $50. I heard you asking around." Margaret felt trapped. She needed the work done, but she didn't want Sam Morrison anywhere near her property. His words from 3 days ago still stung like fresh wounds. "Why do you care?" she asked. "According to you, I'm just a scheming widow trying to trick men into taking care of me." Sam winced. "I spoke out of turn. I was wrong to say those things. Were you? Or were you just wrong to say them out loud?" "I was wrong about everything." Margaret hung up another sheet, using the task to avoid looking at him. "I don't believe you." "Then let me prove it. Let me finish your roof. No charge." Now Margaret did look at him. "Why would you work for free?" "Because I owe you an apology and words aren't enough." Emma came running around the corner of the house, having heard Sam's voice. "Mr. Morrison, are you going to finish our roof?" "If your mama will let me." Emma looked between her mother and Sam, sensing the tension but not understanding it. "Please, Mama. The kitchen is getting all wet." Margaret felt pulled in 2 directions. She needed the work done and she couldn't afford to hire anyone else. But Sam's accusations had hurt her deeply, and she wasn't ready to forgive him. "Emma, go inside and start your arithmetic lessons," she said. "But Mama, inside now." After Emma left, Margaret and Sam stood facing each other in the yard. The morning sun was getting hot and Margaret could feel sweat gathering under her collar. "Mr. Morrison, you don't know anything about my life or my marriage. You don't know what it's like to lose the person you love most in the world, and you certainly don't know what it's like to have people constantly telling you what you should do with your life." Sam shifted uncomfortably. "You're right. I don't know those things. I loved my husband more than my own life. When he died, part of me died with him. The only reason I kept going was for Emma. I built this business with my own hands because I had to survive. I've never asked any man for help, and I've never led anyone to believe I wanted to remarry. But those men who keep coming around are making their own assumptions." Margaret interrupted. "I've been honest with every one of them. I've told Mr. Bradley, Dr. Hayes, and Mr. Morrison that I'm not interested in remarrying. I've never encouraged their attention or given them false hope." Sam looked down at his boots. I assumed. You assumed I was playing games because that's what you wanted to believe. It's easier to think that all women are manipulative than to admit that maybe, just maybe, I'm capable of managing my own life." Margaret's voice was rising, and she could feel 2 years of frustration pouring out. "Do you know how many people have told me I need a husband? Do you know how many times I've been told that Emma needs a father? Everyone in this town thinks they know what's best for me better than I do." "I'm sorry," Sam said quietly. "I had no right to judge you. No, you didn't, but you did it anyway. Just like everyone else." Margaret turned to go back to her laundry, but Sam stepped forward. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, please. Let me ask you something." She turned back, arms crossed over her chest. "Why haven't you remarried? Not because people tell you to, but because you want to?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer but still firm. "Because I don't love any of those men. I may never love anyone that way again, and I won't marry for convenience or security or because it's what people expect me to do. Even if it would make life easier. Especially then. I watched my parents' marriage, Mr. Morrison. My mother married my father because he was stable and respectable. They lived together for 30 years without ever really loving each other. They were polite and proper and miserable. I won't do that to myself or to Emma." Sam nodded slowly. "I understand now. Do you? Because 3 days ago you seemed to think you had me all figured out. 3 days ago I was a fool. I've been alone for so long that I forgot what real love looks like. When I saw those men paying attention to you, I thought you were like other women I've known." "What other women?" Sam hesitated. "Women who saw my size and thought I might be useful, who pretended to care about me until they found someone better. I got bitter, and I took that bitterness out on you. Margaret studied his face, looking for signs of deception. But Sam's brown eyes were honest and sad. That doesn't excuse what you said. No, it doesn't. I'm not asking you to excuse it. I'm asking you to let me make it right. By fixing my roof for free? By fixing your roof and keeping my opinions to myself. Margaret looked at the water stains spreading across her kitchen wall. She thought about the money she would have to spend to hire someone else. Money she needed for Emma's winter clothes and school supplies. If I let you finish the work, it will be a business arrangement. Nothing more. You'll do the job, I'll pay you the agreed price, and then you'll leave. I understand. And if you say one more word about my personal life or the men who visit this house, I'll run you off with my shotgun, yes. Ma'am. Margaret walked to the clothesline and picked up her laundry basket. You can start tomorrow morning early. I want this finished as quickly as possible. As she walked toward the house, Sam called after her. Mrs. O'Sullivan? She turned around. For what it's worth, I think your husband was a lucky man. Margaret felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. Yes, Mr. Morrison, he was. That evening, as Margaret tucked Emma into bed, her daughter asked, Are you still mad at Mr. Morrison? I'm still upset with him, yes. But he said he was sorry. Sometimes sorry isn't enough. Emma. Sometimes people say things that hurt so much that it takes time to forgive them. Did he say something mean about Papa? Margaret smoothed Emma's hair. No, dear. He said something mean about me. That's worse, Emma said firmly. Nobody should be mean to my mama. Margaret smiled despite her lingering anger. I love you, little one. I love you too. Will you give Mr. Morrison another chance? We'll see. But as Margaret lay in bed that night, listening to the wind rattle the damaged porch roof, she found herself thinking about the sadness in Sam's eyes when he talked about women who had used him. Maybe they were both more wounded than she had realized. Sam arrived at the boarding house before sunrise the next morning. Margaret heard his footsteps on the front porch as she was starting breakfast for her guests. She looked out the kitchen window and saw him unloading lumber from a wagon, working quietly so as not to wake anyone. When she opened the back door to let in some fresh air, Sam was already measuring boards for the roof frame. He looked up and touched the brim of his hat. Morning, Mrs. O'Sullivan. Good morning, she replied, her voice still cool. Coffee's on the stove if you want some. Thank you, but I brought my own. Sam pulled a large thermos from his toolbox and poured steaming coffee into a metal cup. Margaret noticed that the cup was bigger than normal ones, sized for his enormous hands. As the morning progressed, Margaret found herself watching Sam work from the kitchen window. She was impressed by his skill and attention to detail. Every cut was precise, every nail driven straight. He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, never wasting motion or energy. Around 10 o'clock, Emma came outside to play in the garden. She immediately went to where Sam was working and started chattering about her arithmetic lessons and the story her friend Mary had told her about a family of bears, and the baby bear's porridge was just right, Emma concluded. Just like how Mama makes mine. Sam smiled down at her. Your mama seems like a good cook. She makes the best biscuits in the whole world. And her apple pie won first prize at the county fair last year. Is that so? Uh-huh, and she can sew anything. She made my whole dress from just some old curtains. Margaret felt her cheeks warm as she listened to Emma boasting about her accomplishments. She had been proud of that dress, even though it was made from necessity rather than choice. Your mama sounds very talented, Sam said, hammering a nail. You're lucky to have her. I know. She takes care of me all by herself ever since Papa went to heaven. She says we're a team. Sam paused in his work. When did your Papa go to heaven? 2 years and 3 months ago. He got hurt in the mine and couldn't get better. But Mama says he's watching over us. I'm sure he is. Emma climbed onto a wooden crate to get closer to where Sam was working. Do you have a Mama and Papa? Sam's face grew sad. Not anymore. They died when I was young. That's sad. Who took care of you? Different people. Mostly I took care of myself, and that must have been scary. Sometimes. But you learn to be strong when you have to be. Emma nodded seriously. Mama says the same thing. She says being scared is okay, but you can't let it stop you from doing what needs to be done. Margaret felt a pang in her chest. She hadn't realized Emma had been listening so carefully to all their conversations about being brave and independent. That afternoon, while Sam was on the roof nailing down metal sheets, Dr. Hayes stopped by to check on a guest who had complained of stomach trouble. Margaret appreciated that he had come quickly when she sent for him. But she noticed how he lingered after examining the patient. "The man just needs to eat lighter meals and avoid spicy food," Dr. Hayes told her. "Nothing serious. Thank you for coming so quickly." "Of course. I'm always available when you need me, Margaret. For anything at all." From his position on the roof, Sam had a clear view of the conversation. Margaret saw him pause in his work to listen. "I've been thinking about our conversation last month," Dr. Hayes continued, "about Emma's future and your need for security. Have you given it any more thought?" Margaret felt her jaw tighten. "Dr. Hayes, I told you then that I wasn't interested in remarrying. That hasn't changed. But surely you can see the advantages. Emma needs male guidance as she grows up, and you need someone to share the burdens of running this place. Emma and I are managing just fine. But for how long? What happens when you get older? What happens if you become ill? What happens if the business fails?" From the roof came the sound of Sam driving nails with unnecessary force. Bang, 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 each strike harder than the last. "Dr. Hayes, I appreciate your concern, but my personal life is not your business. As a friend, I feel obligated to point out the practical realities of your situation. As a friend, you should respect my decisions." After Dr. Hayes left, Sam climbed down from the roof. Margaret expected him to make some sarcastic comment about the doctor's visit, but he simply picked up a new bundle of metal sheets and carried them up the ladder. That evening, as Margaret was serving dinner to her guests, Emma came running into the dining room with tears streaming down her face. "Mama, I can't find Mittens anywhere. She's been gone since this morning." Mittens was Emma's cat, a small gray tabby that had appeared at the boarding house 6 months ago and never left. Emma loved that cat more than any of her toys. "She probably just found a cool place to nap, dear. You know how cats are in hot weather, but I've looked everywhere, in the barn, under the porch, in all her favorite spots. What if she's hurt? What if she's lost?" Margaret's guests looked sympathetic, but continued eating their dinner. Margaret was torn between comforting Emma and attending to her paying customers. "I'll help you look after dinner," she promised. But before Margaret could finish serving dessert, Sam appeared at the back door. He was carrying something small and gray in his hands. "Is this who you're looking for?" he asked Emma. "Mittens," Emma cried, rushing to take the cat from Sam's arms. "Where did you find her?" "She was stuck under the old chicken coop. The boards collapsed in the storm and trapped her underneath. She couldn't get out, but she wasn't hurt." Emma hugged the cat tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison, thank you so much. Just glad she's safe." Margaret felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Sam had taken time from his own evening to search for a little girl's lost cat. He hadn't been asked to help, and he certainly hadn't been paid for it. "How did you know to look under the chicken coop?" Margaret asked. "I heard her crying when I was putting my tools away. Took me a while to figure out where the sound was coming from. Can I give Mr. Morrison some pie, Mama?" "To say thank you?" Margaret looked at Sam, who was brushing dirt from his clothes. "Would you like some apple pie, Mr. Morrison?" Emma wasn't exaggerating about my baking. Sam seemed surprised by the offer. "That's very kind, but I don't want to impose." "It's not imposing. You saved Emma's cat. The least I can do is feed you." Margaret served Sam a large slice of pie on the back porch where he could sit without hitting his head on the ceiling. Emma sat beside him, petting Mittens and telling Sam all about how she had found the cat as a kitten. "She was so tiny," Emma said. "Mama said she probably wouldn't live, but I fed her with a baby bottle and kept her warm, and she got bigger and stronger." "Sounds like you're a good nurse," Sam said. "Mama taught me. She says taking care of things is important even when it's hard work." Margaret watched from the kitchen window as Emma chattered, and Sam listened patiently. She noticed how gently he handled his fork, careful not to drop crumbs or make noise. Everything about him suggested someone who was used to being careful around other people's things. After Emma went to bed, Margaret brought Sam a cup of coffee. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, listening to the night sounds of crickets and distant cattle. "Thank you for finding Mittens," Margaret said. "Emma would have been heartbroken if something had happened to her. She's a sweet child. You've raised her well." "I try. It's not always easy doing it alone." Sam nodded. "I imagine not. But she seems happy and healthy. That says a lot about the kind of mother you are." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. It had been a long time since anyone had complimented her parenting. Most people just told her what she was doing wrong or what Emma was missing by not having a father. "I worry sometimes that I'm not enough. That she needs more than I can give her." From what I can see, she has everything she needs. Love, security, guidance. Those are the important things. Dr. Hayes thinks she needs a father figure. Sam was quiet for a moment. Maybe she does someday. But not just any man will do. It would have to be someone who loves her as much as you do. Someone who understands what a precious gift she is. Margaret looked at Sam in surprise. His words were thoughtful and kind, so different from his harsh judgments a few days ago. "You're very different than I first thought," she said. "People usually see the size before they see anything else. I've gotten used to it, but sometimes it makes me defensive." "Is that why you said those things about me? Because you were being defensive?" Sam nodded. "I saw those men paying attention to you, and I assumed the worst. I've met women who only saw me as useful, never as a person. I thought you were like them. But you don't think that anymore? No, I can see how much you love Emma, how hard you work, how independent you are. You don't need anyone to take care of you. You're taking care of yourself just fine." Margaret felt something shift inside her chest, a small crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Sam Morrison was not the bitter, judgmental man she had thought he was. He was someone who had been hurt and had learned to protect himself by assuming the worst about people. Maybe they weren't so different after all. The roof repairs were finished by the end of the week, but Sam found reasons to return to the boarding house. First, he noticed that the front porch steps were loose and needed fixing. Then he saw that the chicken coop needed to be rebuilt properly. When Margaret mentioned that the well pump was making strange noises, Sam offered to take a look at it. Margaret knew she could have handled these small problems herself or hired someone else, but she found herself saying yes when Sam offered to help. There was something comforting about having him around. He worked quietly and efficiently, never making her feel like she owed him anything more than fair payment. Emma had grown quite fond of Sam. Every day after school, she would run to wherever he was working and tell him about her lessons, her friends, and whatever was on her 8-year-old mind. Sam listened patiently to her chatter and seemed genuinely interested in her stories. "Mr. Morrison, do you know how to read?" Emma asked one afternoon as Sam repaired the chicken coop. "Yes, I can read." "Why do you ask?" "Because Mama reads to me every night before bed, but sometimes she's too tired. Would you like to read to me sometime?" Sam glanced toward the house where Margaret was hanging laundry. "I think that's something your mama should do. But she said I could ask if you wanted to. She said you might like stories too." That evening, Sam knocked on the back door holding a worn book in his hands. "Emma said you might let me read to her tonight." Margaret smiled. "She's been asking about it all day. Come in." Sam had to duck through every doorway, but he seemed more comfortable in the house now. Emma had prepared by moving her small chair closer to her bed and setting a larger chair beside it. "This was Papa's chair," Emma explained. "It's the biggest one we have." Sam sat carefully in the wooden chair, which creaked under his weight but held firm. Emma climbed into her bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. "What book did you bring?" she asked. Sam held up the worn volume. "It's a collection of fairy tales. But if you don't like fairy tales, I can read something else. I love fairy tales. Mama says they're about people who are brave and kind even when things are hard." Sam opened the book and began reading in his deep, gentle voice. Margaret stood in the doorway listening to the story of a poor girl who was kind to everyone she met, even when they were unkind to her. When the story was finished, Emma clapped her hands. "That was wonderful. Will you read to me again tomorrow?" "If your mama says it's all right." Emma looked at Margaret with pleading eyes. "Please, Mama." "We'll see," Margaret said, but she was already nodding. Sam's reading voice was soothing and expressive. Even she had enjoyed listening to the story. After Emma was asleep, Margaret and Sam sat on the back porch with cups of coffee. The evening air was cool and pleasant, a relief from the heat of the day. "Thank you for reading to her," Margaret said. "She misses having a man around sometimes. Not that she complains, but I can tell. She's a remarkable child. You should be proud." "I am, though I worry about her future sometimes. What kind of opportunities will she have in a small town like this?" "What do you mean?" Margaret sipped her coffee, choosing her words carefully. "Emma is very bright. She could be a teacher, maybe even go to college someday. But that takes money and connections and opportunities that I'm not sure I can provide. You're providing the most important thing, which is love, and the belief that she can be anything she wants to be. That's worth more than money or connections." Margaret looked at Sam with surprise. "You really believe that?" "I do." I never had parents who believed in me. I had to figure out my own worth, and it took me a long time. Emma already knows she's valuable because you tell her so every day. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the distant sounds of the night. Margaret found herself studying Sam's profile in the moonlight. His face was weathered and lined, but there was kindness in his features that she hadn't noticed before. "Can I ask you something personal?" Margaret said. "Of course. How did you end up so tall? Were your parents tall too?" Sam shifted in his chair. "I don't really know. I was left at an orphanage when I was very young. The people who ran it said my parents couldn't take care of a child like me." "Like you?" "Different. I was already unusually large as a baby, and I just kept growing. By the time I was 10, I was taller than most grown men. The other children were afraid of me. The adults didn't know what to do with me." Margaret felt her heart ache for the lonely child Sam must have been. That must have been very difficult. "I learned to be useful. If I could help with heavy work or reach things others couldn't, people would tolerate me. But I was never really part of any family or community." "Is that why you became a ranch hand?" "Partly. Outdoor work suits me. Animals don't care how tall you are. And there's always something that needs fixing or building." Margaret wanted to ask more questions, but she could see that talking about his past was painful for Sam. Instead, she told him about her own childhood, growing up on a farm in Missouri with parents who loved each other, but never seemed quite happy. "They married for practical reasons," she explained. "Papa needed help with the farm and Mama needed security. They were good people, but there was never any real joy between them. That's why it was so important to me to marry for love." "Tell me about your husband," Sam said softly. Margaret's face lit up. Patrick was wonderful. He was funny and kind and optimistic about everything. He could make me laugh even when things were difficult. We met at a church social, and I knew within 5 minutes that I wanted to spend my life with him. "How long were you married?" 6 years. They were the happiest years of my life. We had plans, dreams about the future. We wanted more children, hoped to expand the boarding house, maybe even travel someday. "I'm sorry you lost him so young." Margaret wiped away a tear that had started to fall. "The worst part is that Emma barely remembers him. She was so little when he died. Sometimes I worry that she'll forget him completely." "She won't forget him as long as you keep his memory alive. And from what I can see, she has the best parts of both her parents." Over the following weeks, Sam became a regular presence at the boarding house. He ate dinner with Margaret and Emma most evenings, helped with small repairs and improvements, and read bedtime stories to Emma. Margaret found herself looking forward to their conversations on the back porch after Emma was asleep. Sam told her about his travels across the Western Territories, the different jobs he had worked, and the places he had seen. Margaret shared her dreams for Emma's future and her hopes for the boarding house business. "I'd like to add 2 more rooms upstairs," she said one evening. "The railroad is bringing more travelers through town and I could use the extra income." "That's a good idea. Have you talked to anyone about the construction?" "Not yet. It would be a big project and I'm not sure I can afford it. I could help with the work. That would cut down on the labor costs." Margaret looked at him in surprise. "You'd do that?" "If you want me to. I enjoy working with my hands and I like helping you and Emma. But what about your job at the Peterson Ranch? Jake Peterson is a good man, but ranch work is just a job. This feels more like home." The word hung in the air between them. Margaret felt her heart skip a beat. Sam was talking about more than just construction work. "Sam," she said carefully, "what are you saying?" He looked down at his hands, which were wrapped around his coffee cup. "I'm saying that I've never felt as comfortable anywhere as I do here. With you and Emma. I know I'm not the kind of man you probably imagined in your life, but—" "Stop," Margaret interrupted. "Don't tell me what kind of man I imagined. Let me decide that for myself." Sam looked up at her, hope and fear battling in his eyes. "What do you see when you look at me?" Margaret considered the question seriously. "I see someone who is kind to my daughter. Someone who works hard and keeps his word. Someone who listens when I talk and treats me with respect. Someone who makes me feel safe and comfortable, even though I'm different." "Yes, even though you're different. Maybe because you're different." They looked at each other across the small table, both afraid to say more. But something had changed between them. Something deeper than friendship, but not yet love. "I should go," Sam said, standing up. "It's getting late." "Sam, wait." Margaret stood too, her heart pounding. "Would you like to stay for breakfast tomorrow?" Emma would love it, and I make good pancakes. Sam smiled, the first truly happy smile Margaret had seen from him. I'd like that very much. As Sam walked back to his cabin that night, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt like he belonged somewhere, and for the first time in his life he dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, someone could love him for who he really was. September brought the worst drought anyone in Millbrook could remember. The creek that supplied water to the town had dried up to a trickle, and the wells were running dangerously low. Cattle stood listlessly in the fields, and the crops that hadn't already died were withering in the relentless heat. The town council called an emergency meeting at the church. Margaret attended with most of the other business owners, while Emma stayed with Mrs. Peterson. The mood in the room was grim as Mayor Williams explained the situation. If we don't find a new water source soon, we may have to evacuate the town, he said. The railroad company is already talking about moving their depot to Cedar Falls. That would be a disaster for everyone. The railroad brought most of the business to Millbrook. Without it, the town would die. What about drilling new wells? Asked Dr. Hayes. We've tried 3 different spots, replied Jim Bradley from the bank. All of them came up dry. There has to be water somewhere, said William Morrison. The question is how deep we have to dig. From the back of the room, Sam Morrison raised his hand. Margaret was surprised to see him there. She hadn't known he was planning to attend the meeting. I might be able to help, Sam said, standing up slowly. His head nearly touched the church ceiling, and everyone turned to stare at him. How so? Asked Mayor Williams. I've worked in mining country. I know how to read the land for water signs, and I know how to dig deep wells. What kind of signs? Asked Jake Peterson. Sam walked to the front of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. You look for certain types of rocks the way the ground slopes, where trees grow thicker even in dry years. Water leaves patterns if you know what to look for. Margaret watched the faces of the townspeople as Sam spoke. Some looked skeptical, but others seemed hopeful. The giant who had been an object of curiosity and fear might be their salvation. Have you found water before? Asked the mayor. Yes, sir. 3 times. Once in Arizona, once in Colorado, and once in New Mexico. The deepest well was 60 feet down, but we found good water. How long would it take? Depends on how deep we have to go. Could be a week, could be a month. But I'd stake my reputation on finding water within 50 miles of here. The town council members looked at each other. They didn't have many choices. What would you need? Asked Jim Bradley. A drilling rig, pipe, and men who aren't afraid of hard work. I can do most of the digging myself, but I'll need help with the equipment. Margaret felt a surge of pride as she watched Sam take charge of the situation. This was a side of him she hadn't seen before. Confident, knowledgeable, and natural leader. I volunteer to help, said Jake Peterson. Me too, added Dr. Hayes. Within minutes, a dozen men had volunteered. Even Thomas Bradley and William Morrison, despite their obvious nervousness around Sam, offered their assistance. The next morning, Sam began surveying the land around Millbrook. Margaret watched from her porch as he walked slowly across the fields, stopping occasionally to examine rocks or test the soil. Emma ran alongside him, fascinated by his methods. What are you looking for now, Mr. Morrison? Emma asked. See how green those cottonwood trees are, even though everything else is brown? Trees like that have deep roots. They're getting water from somewhere underground. So we should dig there? Maybe. But first I want to check a few more spots. By the end of the week, Sam had identified 3 possible locations for wells. The town council decided to try the most promising spot first, a low area near the old cemetery, where Sam said the underground rock formations looked right. The work began on Monday morning. Sam had borrowed a drilling rig from a mining company in the next county, and the volunteer crew assembled at dawn. Margaret brought coffee and sandwiches for the workers, and Emma appointed herself as the official water bearer. The first day was brutal. The men took turns operating the drill while Sam guided the work, explaining how to recognize different types of rock and soil. By evening, they had gone down 15 feet without finding water. Don't give up, Sam told the tired crew. Sometimes the best water is deeper than you expect. On the 3rd day, they hit rock. The drill bit became harder to turn and progress slowed to inches per hour. Some of the men started to grumble about wasted effort. Maybe we should try one of the other spots, suggested William Morrison, wiping sweat from his face. Not yet, Sam replied. This kind of rock usually means water is close. We just have to get through it. Margaret could see the doubt in the men's faces. They were hot, tired, and discouraged. Sam was asking them to trust him based on knowledge they didn't understand. "I believe in Mr. Morrison," Emma announced loudly. "He found mittens when nobody else could. He'll find water too." The men smiled at Emma's confidence and their mood lightened slightly. They went back to work with renewed energy. On Friday afternoon at 37 feet down, the drill bit suddenly dropped through the rock layer. Water began seeping up around the drill shaft, slowly at first, then faster. "Water!" shouted Dr. Hayes. "We've got water." The crew cheered and clapped Sam on the back. Within an hour, they had installed a pump and were drawing up clear, cold water from deep in the earth. Margaret stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Sam accept congratulations from the townspeople who had doubted him just a week ago. She felt her heart swell with pride and something deeper, something that felt like love. That evening, the town held an impromptu celebration in the church. Tables were set up with food brought by every family, and someone brought out a fiddle for dancing. Margaret wore her best dress, a blue cotton with tiny white flowers that brought out her eyes. Sam had cleaned up and put on a white shirt that was actually long enough for his arms. Margaret thought he looked handsome, despite his unusual height. When he smiled, his whole face transformed. "You saved the town," Margaret told him as they stood outside the church watching the celebration through the windows. "We all worked together. I just knew where to look. Don't be modest. You saw something nobody else could see. You took a risk and you were right." Sam looked down at her, his expression serious. "I've been taking a lot of risks lately." "What do you mean?" "Staying in Millbrook longer than I planned. Getting attached to people. Hoping for things I never thought I could have." Margaret's heart began to race. "What kinds of things?" "A home, a family. Someone to care about who might care about me too." They were standing close now, close enough that Margaret had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. In the light from the church windows, she could see the hope and fear battling in his expression. "Sam," she whispered. "I know I'm not what you expected," he said quickly. "I know I'm too big, too different, too—" Margaret reached up and placed her finger gently against his lips, stopping his words. "You're exactly what I didn't know I was looking for." Sam stared down at her in amazement. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, Margaret stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. It was a soft, tentative kiss full of questions and possibilities. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "I'm sure," Margaret whispered. From behind them came the sound of applause. They turned to see Emma standing in the church doorway, clapping her hands and grinning. "It's about time," Emma announced. "I was wondering when you two would figure it out." Margaret blushed furiously. "Emma O'Sullivan, how long have you been watching?" "Long enough. Can we be a real family now?" Sam looked from Emma to Margaret, his eyes full of wonder. "Is that what you want?" "More than anything," Margaret replied. Sam swept them both into his arms, lifting them off the ground in a bear hug that made Emma giggle, and Margaret feel safer than she had in years. When he set them down, Emma looked up at both adults seriously. "Does this mean Mr. Morrison will live with us?" Margaret and Sam looked at each other, suddenly aware that they had jumped several steps ahead in their relationship. "Well," Sam said carefully, "first I should probably ask your mama to marry me properly." "Are you going to?" Emma asked. Sam dropped to one knee, which brought him down to Margaret's eye level. "Margaret O'Sullivan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Samuel Morrison. Yes, I will." As they kissed again, this time with Emma cheering in the background, Margaret realized that love had found her when she least expected it, and it looked nothing like what she had imagined, which made it even more precious. The news of Margaret and Sam's engagement spread through Millbrook faster than wildfire. Some people were shocked, others were delighted, and a few seemed genuinely confused about how such an unlikely match had come about. But nobody could deny that the giant who had saved their town's water supply deserved happiness. Mrs. Peterson was the first to offer help with wedding preparations. "I have my grandmother's lace veil," she told Margaret. "It would look beautiful with your coloring." Dr. Hayes, swallowing his disappointment like a gentleman, offered to give Margaret away at the ceremony since her father was too far away to travel. "It would be my honor," he said sincerely. Even Thomas Bradley and William Morrison, despite their own hopes for Margaret's hand, came forward with congratulations and offers of assistance. The drought and Sam's heroic efforts had changed how the town saw him. He was no longer the frightening stranger, but the man who had saved them all. Emma was beside herself with excitement. She appointed herself chief wedding planner and had opinions about everything from flowers to food to music. "Mama, can I wear my pink dress with the ruffles?" she asked one morning at breakfast. "Of course, dear. You'll be my maid of honor." "And Mr. Morrison, Papa Sam, what will he wear?" Sam nearly choked on his coffee. "Papa Sam? Well, I can't keep calling you Mr. Morrison if you're going to be my papa. And I can't call you Papa because that was my real papa's name. So Papa Sam works perfectly." Margaret watched Sam's face transform with emotion. She could see that the idea of being Emma's father, even in name, meant everything to him. "Papa Sam sounds perfect," he said, his voice rough with feeling. The wedding was planned for the first Saturday in October, just 3 weeks after the engagement. Margaret wanted a simple ceremony, but the whole town seemed determined to make it a celebration. "It's not every day we get to see a love story like yours," explained Mayor Williams, when he offered the use of the church and the town square for the reception. "Besides, after Sam saved our water supply, this is the least we can do." The biggest challenge was finding clothes that would fit Sam properly. The town's tailor, Mr. Hoffman, had never made a suit for anyone so tall. "I'll need extra fabric," he told Sam after taking measurements. "And we'll have to special order boots in your size from Dallas. But don't worry, you'll look fine for your wedding day." Margaret spent her evenings altering her mother's wedding dress. It was made of ivory silk with intricate beadwork, and it had been carefully preserved in a trunk for 30 years. With some adjustments to the length and waist, it would be perfect. 2 weeks before the wedding, Margaret received an unexpected visitor. She was hanging laundry when a well-dressed woman in her 50s stepped out of a hired carriage. "Are you Mrs. O'Sullivan?" the woman asked. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Catherine Morrison. I believe you're engaged to my nephew, Samuel." Margaret's heart skipped a beat. Sam had never mentioned having any living relatives. "Please come inside. Sam is working at the Peterson Ranch, but he should be back this evening." Over tea in the parlor, Catherine Morrison explained that she had lost track of Sam when he left the orphanage at 16. "I was traveling abroad with my late husband," she said. "When I returned and tried to find Samuel, he had simply disappeared. How did you find him now?" A business associate mentioned reading about a giant cowboy who had saved a Texas town from drought. The description sounded like Samuel, so I hired a detective to investigate. When I learned he was getting married, I knew I had to come. Margaret studied the woman's face, looking for resemblance to Sam. Catherine Morrison was tall for a woman, with kind brown eyes and graying hair pulled back in an elegant style. "Samuel doesn't know I'm alive," Catherine continued. "His parents were my brother and his wife. When Samuel was born so unusually large, they panicked. They were young and poor, and they believed the doctors who said he would never be normal. They gave him to the orphanage and told everyone he had died." Margaret felt anger rise in her chest. "They abandoned him because of his size?" "I'm afraid so. I was traveling in Europe at the time and didn't learn what had happened until years later. By then, Samuel had run away from the orphanage and no one knew where he had gone." "Why didn't you search for him sooner?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I tried, but Samuel had learned to hide from the world. He used different names, moved constantly, and avoided anyone who might know his family. I finally gave up hope of ever finding him." That evening, when Sam arrived for dinner, Margaret met him at the door with an unusual expression on her face. "Sam, there's someone here to see you. Someone from your family." Sam's face went pale. "That's impossible. I don't have any family. You do. She's in the parlor, and she's been looking for you for a very long time." Sam had to duck low to enter the parlor, and when he straightened up, he found himself face to face with a woman who looked hauntingly familiar. "Hello, Samuel," Catherine said softly. "I'm your Aunt Catherine. Your father's sister." Sam stared at her in shock. You're supposed to be dead. They told me all my family was dead. They lied to you, dear boy. I've been searching for you for 15 years. The reunion was emotional and difficult." Catherine explained the truth about Sam's parents and their decision to abandon him. She also revealed that she was a wealthy widow who owned several businesses in Chicago. "I want to make up for lost time," she told Sam. "I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." Sam was overwhelmed by the revelation that he had family who cared about him, but he was also angry about the years of loneliness he had endured unnecessarily. "I understand if you can't forgive them," Catherine said. "I never forgave my brother for what he did to you." but I hope you can forgive me for not finding you sooner." Emma, who had been listening from the kitchen doorway, came into the parlor and climbed onto Sam's lap. "Papa Sam, does this mean you have a family now too?" Sam looked down at Emma, then at Margaret, then at his aunt. "I already have a family. The best family I could ask for. But I suppose it's nice to know there are more people who care about me." Catherine stayed for the wedding, and her presence added an unexpected blessing to the ceremony. She had brought gifts for everyone, including a beautiful pearl necklace for Margaret and a set of children's books for Emma. On the morning of the wedding, Margaret woke early and stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the garden where the ceremony would take place. Mrs. Peterson and several other women had spent days decorating with flowers and white ribbons. Tables were set up for the reception, and someone had even hired a small band from the next town. Margaret put on her mother's dress, which fit perfectly after all the alterations. Emma helped her with the veil, standing on a chair to reach high enough. "You look beautiful, Mama," Emma said. "Papa Sam is going to cry when he sees you." "Do you think so?" "I know so. He gets tears in his eyes just when you smile at him." The ceremony was held in the garden behind the boarding house, with chairs arranged in rows under the oak trees. Nearly the entire town came to witness the marriage of the widow and the giant. Sam wore his new suit, which made him look distinguished despite his unusual height. When Margaret appeared at the end of the garden path, walking slowly toward him on Dr. Hayes's arm, Sam did indeed have tears in his eyes. The minister, who had to look up to address Sam, spoke about love conquering all obstacles and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to see the heart beneath. "Do you, Samuel Morrison, take Margaret to be your wife, to love and cherish her for all the days of your life?" "I do," Sam said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden. "Do you, Margaret O'Sullivan, take Samuel to be your husband, to love and honor him for all the days of your life?" "I do," Margaret replied, looking up into Sam's gentle brown eyes. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Sam had to bend nearly in half to kiss his bride. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Emma ran up to hug them both. "Now we're really a family." The reception lasted until well after dark, with dancing, music, and more food than anyone could eat. Margaret danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling smaller than usual in his arms, but also completely safe and cherished. "Are you happy?" Sam asked as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," Margaret replied. "What about you?" "I never knew what happiness felt like until I met you and Emma. Now I can't imagine living any other way." As the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Catherine Morrison approached the newlyweds with a final gift. "I want to give you something as a wedding present," she said, handing Sam an envelope. "It's the deed to a house in Chicago, along with enough money to start any business you choose. I know you're happy here, but I want you to have options." Sam opened the envelope and stared at the documents inside. It was more money than he had ever dreamed of having. "Aunt Catherine, this is too much." "Nonsense. It's what your parents should have given you years ago. Use it however you see fit." Sam looked at Margaret. "What do you think?" Margaret considered carefully. "I think we should talk about it as a family. All three of us." They decided to stay in Millbrook, at least for now. Margaret's boarding house was thriving. Sam had found steady work and respect in the community, and Emma was happy in school with her friends. But it was